Good morning, everyone, or at least it's morning where I am. I'm Lucy Gray, and I'm the co-founder of the Global Education Conference. And we're so happy to welcome Lord Jim Knight and TES to our conference this year. We've had Lord Knight present before. He was a great hit at our meetup at the ISTE conference last year. And I know that you're going to be entertained and engaged and have a lot to say, and I think he'll have a lot to say to you, and you'll probably have some questions for him as well. Before we move on, I want to make sure that we thank all of our sponsors, including TES. Without these people, we would not be able to produce this event for you. So thank you, everyone, for supporting our work. Make sure that you take a look at some of the offerings that our sponsors have, because they're directly related to connecting your classroom to the world. So thank you, sponsors. Now we traditionally have everybody indicate where they are in the world. So I'm going to give you whiteboard privileges, everyone. And what I'd like you to do is to look at the tools to the left of the whiteboard and click on the one that looks like a star. And then click on the board and show us where you are. You can also, in the chat, tell us specifically where you are. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. And we typically ask people to share what the weather's like where they are. And it's about, I don't know, 50 degrees here, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's sunny and beautiful here in Chicago. And this kind of gives you an idea of where our audience is from. So it looks like we're a little bit all over the place today. We have Romania. We have London, obviously. It's miserable London weather. We've got a couple people in London, it looks like, besides you, Jim. And where else? Chapel Hill. Jordan. All right, Libby. Okay. We've got York, UK. So, in Canada. Arizona. I think Peggy wins for the best weather right now, probably. So anyway, so we've got a variety of people from a variety of places in the world, and that's what makes this conference so special. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over so that we give Lord Knight as much time as possible to talk to you guys, because he's more entertaining than I ever will be. So Jim, thank you so much for coming and for your support. It's really good to see you this morning, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Lucy. I'm sorry to be a little late joining. I was over-ambitious with the technicals. And what I want to do today is to extend what I did very quickly at ISTE, at that meetup that you referred to, Lucy, and just allow for a bit more exploration of some of those themes, especially with some new content around teachers globally, based on the work that I do here at TES, and then hopefully we'll have time for some discussion at the end. So where I start is with my granddad, who in the 1911 census in Wolverhampton, in the industrial heartlands of England, was shown as being a 15-year-old man, effectively, working in a locksmith's factory, the Chubb factory in Wolverhampton, at a time when, certainly for people like him, you didn't have adolescence. You woke up on your 13th birthday and you left school and you became an adult working in the factory. And his schooling was at the Sisters of Mercy Catholic School for the children of poor Irish immigrants. And the nuns taught him everything he needed to know for that factory setting. He learned how to read and write. He learned socially how to work with other people, turn up on time, and do factory work. And that was fine for him until the outbreak of the First World War, 3 years after that census, when he joined up. He fought in the Somme, he was gassed, he had that whole experience that here in the UK we were remembering yesterday with Remembrance Sunday. But he survived, and he came out of his service changed, in that he had a different social mix in the trenches to just the very insular environment in Wolverhampton and the factory. And his ambitions had changed, and his education, if you like, in the army, it then equipped him to become a traveling salesman, and he effectively joined the middle classes. And so when my mum was born, she was lucky enough to go to Kettering Grammar School in a system where, after the war, it was set up, and 25% of children who got through a test that they took at the age of 10 or 11, called the 11 plus, were lucky enough to be selected to go to an academic school. And you could then go on from there and join the professions. You didn't have to go to university. Only about 6 or 7% of people went to university in those days. But you could, as my mum did, then go into one of the professions, in her case, banking. And she also met my dad, who went to the neighbouring grammar school for boys, because obviously not only were you sifted on the basis of your alleged academic potential, but also on the basis of gender. And my dad was also then able to join the professions without going to university. He studied for his accountancy exams after work, where he was articled as an accountant, and became in the end a chartered accountant. So those guys did really well out of that system, and to some extent there was a logic to that system. The remaining 75% went to another sort of school called a secondary modern school, where they were equipped with the skills they needed to do factory work or to marry someone who did factory work, and that's what the economy needed at the time, and that maybe wasn't fair. You know, my dad was one of 4 brothers. The oldest and the youngest got to grammar school. One became an accountant, the other a banker. The other 2 failed the 11 plus. They did what those people did. Forces, factory, farms were your options, and they, as a group of 4 brothers, never quite hit it off as 4 ever again. They were essentially split at the age of 11 by that schooling system. But that was an education system for its day, and what it allowed my dad to do as a professional accountant was to be able to pay for the privilege of my brother and I to go to a private school. And we were sent to an independent school in southeast London that specialised in getting its boys into Oxbridge. And so my brother and I went to Cambridge University. We were the first in our family ever to go to university, and we went to one of the best in the world. We were very, very fortunate, and we had a great education, but an education at a time where about 13% of people went to university, and where the promise, never written down, but that was implicit, was if you worked hard at school, got good grades, got into a great university, and got your degree, then you pretty much were guaranteed a job for life, in a career pretty much of your choosing, where you'd get a final salary pension, you'd get a 25-year mortgage, you'd pay it off by the time you were in your mid to late 40s, you'd have kids, you'd provide for your kids, and then you could retire in your mid-50s. Everything was pretty sweet. So how did it work out? Well, the first job I ever had was as an 11-year-old in the West End in production of the musical Oliver, working for someone called Cameron McIntosh. And that meant that I fell in love with theatre. I went on to run a theatre in, various theatres in England. That was the last one I ran, the Athenaeum Theatre in Warminster in Wiltshire, an army town, where I quickly fell out of love with the way the country was being run by Mrs. Thatcher, and decided I wanted to be a politician and try and change the world. And I needed to get a job in the meantime, because the people I was working for at the theatre were all local politicians, and I wanted to stand against them. So I ended up selling telephone directory advertising out of a company based in Bath. That lasted for 10 years. I became mayor of my town, I became a politician, eventually schools minister. And that was, 3 or 4 careers. Eventually, I joined the House of Lords as a failed politician, and now work at TES. So that's something like 5 careers. Not the job for life that my education experience was designed for. And I'm now enjoying working at TES. This is a screenshot from our Australia site, but it's a great global teacher resource sharing business and teacher recruitment business, and we run the World University Rankings. We do lots of great fun stuff, and I'm really enjoying it and hope that I'm here for a few years yet. But I am starting to think, well, I've done 4 or 5 careers. What will my next one be? Because I'm only 51 and I'm going to carry on working at least for another 20 years. And so you then say, well, I mean, I am also chair of a business that's diagnosing malaria using iPhones. I could focus on mobile health, and then I chair a charity that's the main digital inclusion delivery organization here in the UK. I could focus on inclusion and digital, my passions, or I could use my experience in education around refugee education, which I think is one of the most compelling causes that we face in the world right now. Or I've always fancied dancing, and I've got a good friend who's on Strictly at the moment. Maybe I should follow Ed Balls, or I could become an academic. I've got a bachelor's, so I've never done any more than that. Maybe it's time I put my money where my mouth was and actually got some qualifications. But then I look at the labour market, and to some extent this explains some of the politics of Brexit and Trump, I think. And it's a familiar graph of low, medium, high-level skills and where the jobs are across those skills, and how that's then changed thanks to technology and globalization, where the middle skilled jobs have been hollowed out. There are a few more high-skilled jobs as a result, but not enough to cope, and that creates dissatisfaction, and it certainly creates uncertainty and insecurity in the labour market. And this summer we saw Foxconn laying off 60,000 factory workers to replace them with robots who therefore are cheaper than $5 a day as a wage. You see Ross, an AI robot lawyer developed by IBM Watson, was being hired by its first official law firm, and you see the threat, if you like, of technology eating further into the options that we have in terms of what our next careers might be. And then I also look at another piece of work that my friend Linda Gretton has done, thinking about how long we're now living. And what she would say is that a child born today in the Western world has a more than 50% chance of living to over 100. And what that then means is, if a child started school this September at the age of 5, there's every chance that they might be working into the next century. And that's just quite challenging, because that means that they're going to have a 60, 70-year working life at a time when they're going to be de-skilled constantly by technology. And they're going to have to keep recreating themselves. The time that we're used to spending on recreation might be spent on recreation as they pivot their careers. And we certainly think that we'll move from an old 20th century construct of having phases of learning and then working and then retiring, to keeping on learning as we recreate ourselves whilst we're working, and then retirement might happen for the lucky ones, or we'll just carry on working for as long as we have the mental capacity to do so. And I suspect that's what I will do, because, at least for me, I do have a job for life in the House of Lords. So lifelong learning is that future that I think we can pretty reasonably predict, and very much powered by mobile technology. So that then makes me think, what's the point of school in that context? What should schooling look like in preparing people for a world that feels very different to certainly the world that I was anticipating when I went to that privileged independent school that I talked about earlier, and that by and large I think our schooling system is still designed for. That's the thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And so when I read Todd Rose's interesting book, The End of Average, Todd's Harvard School of Education academic, he says, he starts his book with this beautiful story about the US Air Force when fast jets were invented and had too many of them crashed, and having dismissed the notion that it might be a problem with the aircraft, they thought it was a problem with the pilots, and then they realized that from what the pilots said, it probably wasn't the pilots either. So they commissioned a study, including a guy on that study knew nothing about aircraft, but he knew everything about human hands, because he'd measured everything to do with human hands. And he predicted that it was a problem to do with the fact that the US Air Force were recruiting on the basis of a standard size specification for pilots, and that the aircraft were all then built to that specification for how big the pilot was expected to be. And his theory was that there wasn't a pilot in the US Air Force who fitted that specification exactly, because there were too many variables in a human. And he was completely right. The reason why the aircraft were crashing was that the instruments were just in slightly the wrong place for people, under overreach or underreach, to make adjustments as they were flying these now much faster planes than they were used to, and therefore there was crashing. And we now, as a result, have adjustable seats in our cars. And what Todd's trying to say in that anecdote is there's no such thing as an average pupil, and yet we've designed our education system around average pupils in standardized tests, in standardized schooling, and to some extent with some notions of pedagogy as being, if you follow the manual, you'll be successful. If it's not working, it's because you're not following a manual rigorously enough in how you're supposed to teach these kids. And obviously, if that were true, given that a manual essentially is an algorithm on paper, we could just replace teachers with computers. And I don't really speak to anyone who thinks that we should replace teachers with computers, because most people understand it's a human business. But if it's a human business, we have to accept that we could now, because of technology in a way that we've never been able to before, chase after the real probability of individualized education, which then means that we don't have standardized tests and compare to an average. Instead, we compare to how we individually were doing before. And it's all about, as that Dyer quote says, that is to be not better than anybody else, but to be better than I used to be, which I think is a vision that many of us can subscribe to. So what then could the school designed in this uncertain world be based around? Well, the first thing I would want to base it around is educating social skills. If we're going to compete with robots, we've got to compete on the basis of our humanity more than anything else, certainly more than on the basis of our ability to recall facts and content. So I would start with social skills, but we also need to have the character, the resilience, the grit, whatever buzzword you choose, to be able to start our own business, to be able to close it, to be able to recreate ourselves and pivot our careers, to be able to start charities and close charities. We're going to have quite a resilience in this uncertain future. We're going to also need to have the conceptual knowledge and understanding of a balanced curriculum, so that we can stream all the knowledge that's going to come through us, all the information, all the stuff that we will get probably through our mobile phones. And we'll need some new qualification structures that are much more agile to cope with this ever-changing world. But then what's then also, I mean, that's what a school, some thoughts initially on what schooling could look like, but also what could teaching look like? Well, I have a corrupted slide here, but what that's trying to say is the world by 2030 will be almost 26 million teachers short just in primary education alone. Now, I believe we will need teachers to bring out the best in humans. So one of the things that I've become interested in is, rather than stressing about how artificial intelligence will replace us, is thinking about how artificial intelligence can enhance teachers and teaching and make it easier for them to chase after that vision of individualized education experiences for every child. We know also that teachers are embracing these digital global teacher networks, such as TES, where we have, as those stats show, 8 million registered users who are sharing and remixing, and there's some stats there about how much the TES network has been growing. There are other teacher networks also out there, and that's exciting in terms of the capacity of teachers growing and a sense of a global capacity emerging. Now we're seeing this sharing of quality, often free, with the OER movement teaching resources. We've recently developed a free tool at TES out of blend space called TES Teach, where teachers can blend and mix their own free content into a sort of secret lesson plan, if you like, that they can then run through and play. And we're seeing massive uptake in that. So we're seeing a huge appetite for teachers to share with each other and to create and curate all of that free stuff and some paid stuff too. We're seeing the emergence of the globalized teacher. So they are starting to see the benefit of spending a little bit of time teaching abroad. It's a massively growing market. Just the international private schools where English is the medium of instruction. Currently, there's about 350,000 teachers working in that sector. It's projected that in 10 years that'll reach 750,000, and the preference from those schools currently are those trained in the UK, the US, and Australia. The teachers report that it's had a positive effect on their practice, and it's enhanced their ability to teach people with diverse needs. They're getting something positive out of it. And indeed, when we've asked a sample of teachers what kind of things they're getting out of it, if you can read that, obviously they're not there for similarity of culture to their home country. People have seemed pretty willing to travel some distance and go into some very different sorts of schools because they welcome that diversity. But as long as the region is stable and secure, and there is a language there that they're familiar with, then it's looking pretty good for the globalized teacher in that sector, which again I think is an interesting trend. We're also seeing teachers demanding a bigger voice. They are starting to push back, I think, against the administrator, against the leader of education telling them what they should and shouldn't consume. They want to have a greater say, and indeed they want to create their own stuff rather than relying on a static textbook. And again, when we've asked in the US about that, there seems to be quite an appetite for the OERs over textbooks, and that's again an interesting trend, and it's a trend where actually school budgets can save quite a lot of money by investing digitally, and indeed publishers themselves are seeing that and are working out how they're going to carry on with a new business model in that very different world. And those teachers that are embracing the technology are then becoming these sort of almost entrepreneurial figures as they're creating content, which also excites me. They appear to be great at marketing and selling. They would tend to be confident in front of a bunch of people, surprise, surprise. They're pretty agile in responding to the signals that they get back from their audience. They most fundamentally understand what students want and what drives learning because they are walking the walk. And they know how to improvise, which is important for any kind of entrepreneur. So the sort of edupreneur, the teacherpreneur, whatever buzzwords again you want to use, is appearing to grow, and that's then underpinned by just a very obvious thing that they are motivated by that strong sense of social purpose, which is very exciting. And I would just sort of finish before opening it up to the discussion by just telling you a story about Duncan there, who was a teacher, teaching in Wales in the UK, and he was interested in behavioural management. He was interested in how you could plan where people sat more fluidly, more easily, and he came up with a design for some technology that might help him do that. And he bumped into this very nice guy that he's with from Lithuania, who could write the code. And together they have built a wonderful product rooted in Duncan's teaching practice that is helping lots of teachers around the UK and now around the world in behavior management by just a very simple thing of helping them do seating plans in seconds. And that's just an example of the teacherpreneur that we're starting to see emerge. So, whilst we've got a huge challenge for teachers in adapting their practice to move away from a content recall, testing and tables-based system of education to moving to one where it's much more about sorry, I have a computer that's throwing things at me. That's much more about preparing, coaching learners for a very uncertain world where the soft skills are getting harder and the hard skills are getting softer. And that's lots of challenge for teachers in adapting pedagogy and adapting practice to be able to cope with that. The fact that they are now building capacity by collaborating more globally, by understanding things on a global scale, by traveling to work globally, and then some of them applying some of that understanding to start to build the tools that teachers need to be successful in the classroom as teacherpreneurs, I think means, despite all of the uncertainty of this world that we're living in right now, it's also pretty exciting. And that's my positive note to end the formal bit of my presentation, and I hope that will stimulate a little bit of discussion. Now, is anybody there?
Hi, sorry, it's me.
Anybody
I have a
want to
person in another room who's having audio issues, and I switched out for a second. So here's my question for you, Jim, is, I think we're going through what you all went through a few months ago right now with recent changes and here in the United States. And, so there's rapid changes happening in the world, whether we like it or not. And how do we, in your opinion, elaborating on what you just told us, what do we need to do as practitioners to prepare our kids, for this changing world? I mean, what do you think is the most, and what do you think our education systems, how do we need to adapt to all this, I guess, a little bit more? I need to hear more about this because I'm so anxious, I guess. And you've been thinking about this probably longer than we have in the United States, so I'd be curious as to your thoughts to that.
Well, thank you, and it's the $6 billion question in some ways, in that it seems to me that the Brexit vote and your presidential vote is a demonstration of how divided our societies have become. How there are a bunch of people that in the end politicians have taken for granted, who live in areas of sharp industrial decline, if you like, the waged class, those who traditionally would have been able to survive okay and probably afford a holiday most years on the basis of their weekly wage, have been massively let down by the economy. And they understandably are taking it out on the people who run things, be they the people who run countries or the people who run business, and their anger is palpable. And they are now just reacting in what's, in the end, therefore, a fairly logical way in voting for people who articulate what they're saying. Now, I don't agree with their conclusion. I think it's a lot more dangerous where they've got to, but we do have to think about that. And in the end, I've grown up with a notion that social mobility and social justice are really important, and that education is at the root of how we deliver that. But what I've been thinking about since Brexit is the notion that social education can lift a child out of disadvantage. And that's to some extent the American dream. And that's great for that individual. But what happens is that they then go to college and are qualified for jobs that don't exist in the communities they came from. So effectively what education has done is exported the talent out of that community, in a way that it makes it very unlikely that that talent will return to that community. Now, that doesn't mean you don't do that, but it does mean you have to worry about those communities afresh every day, because education isn't delivering it for them unless we can have a vision for social mobility that is more collective, that is saying, okay, what are we going to do in the Rust Belt? You know, I lived in Detroit a long time ago, and I've watched Detroit, and I know that there are some exciting things happening, in, you know, with some creatives moving back. But you know, are they going to create the jobs that the former automobile workers really want? I'm not so sure. And we need to be thinking much harder, not just about K-12 education, but about adult skills education, and how we make it easier for people to have a sense of hope and security about the future in their community, where they are. Because I think it's hard to just shut down a city like Detroit. It's shrunk markedly, but it still needs to be able to survive, because otherwise the only people who will be left are the people who are most likely to struggle to survive in this very uncertain world. But you know, until we find an economic model and a governance model that gives the majority, the significant majority, hope about the future rather than fear about the future, then politicians will continue to win on the basis of fear and hate rather than hope and love.
Oh, well put, well put. I think you're spot on about this. And you know, I think the most curious thing for me personally is, as a consultant and kind of one of these teacherpreneurs that we're talking about in the chat, I figure that I need to change what I'm doing and what the level of education I have, or what, you know, if something's not working for me. And I think it's not that easy for everybody to have that mindset. I think we'd like everybody to have that mindset. Like, you are what you make of yourself. I don't blame someone else for whatever, you know, ills come my way. But that mindset is not, maybe it's an elitist mindset, and people who, maybe in general we haven't empowered people enough to believe that they are in charge of their own destiny.
Well, I certainly think we should be much more conscious of the echo chamber in which we speak. That just because everyone we talk to agrees with us, it doesn't mean that the people we talk to are representative of everyone. And if we can be more conscious of extending our message and our vision and our impact beyond where we're comfortable, you know, like good learning, you know, impact happens on the edge of where we're comfortable, not where we're comfortable. And we just need to keep challenging ourselves on that, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have a few questions in the chat. Gail Lovely asks, how can systems, countries, others help teachers understand how powerful they are? That's a really good question. How can we help teachers understand how powerful they are at a systems level, a country level, other level? That's what Gail is asking.
Yeah, well, and it's a great question. You know, the first thing is we shouldn't forget that the biggest single occupation in the world is teaching. And the more we can connect teachers globally, as you are through this conference and through this community, the more powerful teachers can become. So we should think global in that respect. But like the old you know, Rio Agenda 21 conference of the 90s, we should also act local. Because the other thing I'm perfectly confident about is within communities, even the most disadvantaged communities, schools are seen as a safe place, as a moral place, as a you know, a leadership role which, particularly with the decline of organized religion in many parts of the world, might previously have been held by a church, then a church school. Now it's in some ways more likely to be a school. And so teachers have that moral purpose that I think people do chime with, you know, they have an empathy with. And so if teachers can assert that, obviously not in a patronizing way, in an empathizing way, you know, they understand their parents, they understand their pupils, they understand all of the baggage that pupils bring to school with them that they're coping with outside of school, and just reflect that back in an empowering way for the other people, then they in turn have huge power as educators. And particularly if we can start to extend the education in schools to parents and grandparents as well as children by them being proper community schools, then I think we create something very powerful.
I think that Teach Meets and Ed Camps and those personal local kinds of events have been really impactful in this regard. And one thing we've struggled with is like, how do we take our virtual piece and do something similar, or because I don't think virtual is everything. I think it's important, but I still think that face-to-face, on the ground, boots on the ground way of doing things is really useful. I'm going to move on to Faiza's question here. Teachers are creating their own materials and combining tech tools to reach their objectives. Would you say they are going to have to create their own tests? And that's kind of interesting. I would say yes. I don't know. What do you think, Jim?
Would they have to create their own tests? Well, yes. The problem that some people have with testing, and I think now a late convert, is with the overemphasized use of summative tests for accountability. But test assessment is a fundamental part of teaching. And obviously teachers should be trained to be assessors and to be good at assessing. I think they need a range of assessing skills alongside a range of pedagogic skill. So, if you looked at what a music teacher, what an art teacher, what a drama teacher, what a sports teacher does in assessment, in assessing performance, we should be doing a bit more of that, I think, just as an example. Because when I talk to employers, they're less interested in qualifications as a proxy for skill. They're interested in skill. These days, if you want to hire a coder, you don't look at their CV, you look at GitHub, and you look at what code they've written. And if they've written good enough code, you'll hire them. That cuts all the way through education, because we have a house of cards built on qualifications, and there's a real danger that's going to be pulled away, and that then we'll need teachers who are able to, in the end, to help pupils show the real skills that they have, to equip them for life, to equip them for work, to equip them for more learning. And assessment will be a key part of that. So yeah, they've got to be able to have their own, write their own tests.
This is another one from Gail, which I think is kind of interesting given TES's role and things, and maybe this is a little dicey, but she asked, how does the teacher-made marketplace, like Teachers Pay Teachers and others, because we know there are lots of them, including TES has one, undermine the old school free sharing of best practices and teacher-made materials? I think this is a really interesting development in the ed tech world, is the growth of all these marketplaces. And what she's asking is, how does that change? That we've always given stuff away for free. How does that change everything?
Well, I think it's important that we have both. What we have at TES, for example, is we have over 1 million resources. The vast majority are free, but there's a reasonable number now that teachers choose to charge other teachers for. And I'm happy with it being up to the individual teacher whether they choose to make it free or not. In our case, we've said that we'll never charge for something that a teacher has given to the world for free. So we continue to have teachers uploading resources that they want to share freely. And I think that's great. And I think it's really important for us that we still have a huge number of free resources, because that helps teachers help each other and help themselves. But equally, if a teacher's put a lot of effort and time into something and they decide they need a little bit back in order to cover that, then the ability for them to charge something for that, I think, is fine too. But if we moved to exclusively paid content, then I'd have a lot of worries. I think it's very important that we have the blend.
Another question from Carrie here. She says, if there is a structural issue in the global economy, there goes my phone. Let me mute that there. If there's a structural issue in the global economy, such as not enough occupations in the middle range, is there a role for educators in terms of helping students come to terms with that new structural reality? Wow.
Well, yes. I think there's always going to be a role for educators to keep the experience relevant and to educate people about the realities. Now, I think there are times when it's hard for teachers to keep up with this fast-changing set of realities, because when I spend time, especially in California, and see how much change is coming, it's pretty wild. I met recently one of the original team on the Human Genome project at MIT. That first mapping of the human genome was only a few years ago. It cost millions and millions of dollars. Now costs, how much do you reckon it would cost to map someone's human genome? The answer, $100. Now that's just going to transform medical science as we get all of that understanding and map it to medical records, and things are changing so fast. I think it's hard for teachers, but I think it's important to educate. And that's what I was saying about this hardening up of soft skills. It feels inevitable to me that most of the new work will come out of people starting their own business and out of the gig economy and people working as contractors. And that's an uncertain future, and there's something for policymakers like me to do to create a bit more security for people who are in that world of doing 2 or 3 jobs at once. But there's just a reality to that lifestyle that I do think people are going to have to get used to, and that maybe that the school experience at times gets people multitasking and having to focus on a few things all at once. Running a few projects simultaneously, so that they get that experience of switching attention quite regularly in a day to juggle more than one thing that is important to them and where they have to add value.
This has been a really thoughtful discussion, Jim, and we really appreciate the time that you've taken to share this with us. And we've had some really great comments in the chat too, and I can save that chat for you so you can look at it afterwards. But before we wrap up, I would love for people to know a little bit more, and this is not to be an infomercial necessarily, but I think TES is a really interesting company, and you have an interesting history. And the U.S. part of TES is a little bit different than the UK. And I thought maybe you'd want to give us a little bit of an overview of what you all do and how that came about, and what's coming down the pike that might be of interest to these teachers in terms of helping them do their work.
Cool. Well, thank you. So the heritage of TES is about 100 years of writing about education. So we have a publication that, called the Times Education Supplement that was started about 100 years ago, writing about schooling as a supplement to the London Times. And then some 40 years ago, 50 years ago, the Times Higher Education Supplement was also started. And about maybe 10 years ago, Rupert Murdoch, who was the owner of the Times at the time, sold them off. So we're now free of Murdoch. He wants to raise money for MySpace, whatever happened to that, so he sold them. But as well as having that sort of credibility around journalism and writing about education, which is really important for our longevity now, and we, our news sites are really busy, and we have a US education journalist writing about US news too now, and we do a certain amount around global education news. But that, over time, here in the UK, built up a big teacher jobs business, a teacher recruitment business. So permanent and temporary recruitment is now a big strength of ours, particularly here in the UK, but in the international school market, and to some extent in some other parts of the world too, where they have systems where that works. You know, in the UK, the hiring and firing decisions, the employer is the school rather than the district, which just makes it a much more freer market, if you like, for recruitment. The next bucket that we have is we are top 10 teacher trainer here in the UK, which is a blend of online and offline. And that's working really well. We're the leading provider of subject knowledge enhancement to convert non-specialists in the shortage subjects like maths and science into specialists in those subjects. But we do initial teacher training too, and a certain amount of CPD. And then we have this resource platform that I talked about with 8 million registered users, 1 to 2 million downloads every day. And that allows us to sort of see now the patterns of the week for teachers. You know, we know they're very busy on a Sunday night and a Monday morning downloading resources to help them with their planning and with their week. And by the end of the week, they're not downloading many resources, but they are on their mobile phones browsing jobs as they're exhausted at the end of a busy working week, thinking about how they can get an easier life with a job somewhere else. So we see some of those patterns of behavior that are very interesting for us. The other aspect of our business is through the Times Higher Education Supplement, we have the World University Ranking, and we just in September launched our first US college ranking with the Wall Street Journal, but our world ranking is the leading ranking around the world, and allows us to have some very insights also into the higher ed space, as well as K to 12. The big thing that we're doing in the US, in particular, but is available to everyone around the world, is TES Teach, what was BlendSpace that I mentioned, which is a really nice free tool for teachers to use. It integrates with Google Classroom, but you can just simply drag and drop resources out of the TES site, out of off the web, out of YouTube, out of Google Docs, etc., and just drop them into a really neat structure that you can then play, and it moves from item to item in a really neat, smooth way, and that's for free content only, and it's a really nice tool. And right now, we're really keen on getting people using that around the world, and through that, building their understanding of the rich inventory of resources that we've built up at TES for teachers to be able to use.
It's, and I think there's a fairly new app for TES Teach as well, so people.
There is. There's an app for iOS only, so for iPads that works beautifully. We're really proud of it. It's a lovely user experience, and so if you're an Apple person, grab hold of that. Otherwise, it works really neatly on the website.
And I'm not sure if you caught this earlier because you were busy getting ready, but we're using a gamification platform for the conference to help people with their professional development, and it's called Chrome Warrior. It's linked on our front page. And in our Chrome Warrior game, which is called GEC Connect, there's different activities that conference attendees can do to earn points and a certificate. And one of them is to go into BlendSpace and create a lesson on some sort of global topic to share with the community. So if you're playing with our GEC Connect game, one of your activities could be to go into BlendSpace and explore it a little bit. So
super.
Anyway,
when you hear BlendSpace, we've sort of renamed it TES Teach from BlendSpace. In the end, we're trying to get people to recognize that there's this thing called TES, and it's linked to BlendSpace, and it's got lots of good stuff for them.
Okay, I'll get it right in my brain one of these days. Thank you very much for that correction. TES Teach, what you're looking for, everyone. I'm sleep deprived right now, so you never know what's going to happen and come out of my mouth at this point. So Jim, thank you so much. It's been lovely having you here. It's always great to hear what you have to say, and it provides, I think, great comfort to us in uncertain times. So thank you.
I hope so.
Thank you for being here. Go ahead.
It's been a real pleasure, and I would just, in my final words of comfort are, it's really traumatic when big, uncertain political events happen, but you go through the classic stages of grief, and then when acceptance kicks in, the important thing is just to keep true to your values and keep fighting.
Great advice, and that's a great way to close. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We have several more keynotes coming up today, just so you know. In a couple hours, we have Karen Blumberg, Karen Page, and Kevin, who's been in the room from South Africa. They're going to be talking about EdTech Summit Africa and their work there this summer, which is going to be exciting. We're going to have a guy from Teton Science School talking about place-based education. We're going to have David Ross from the Partnership for 21st Century Learning. So we have definitely a rock star lineup today in terms of keynotes and in the general sessions as well. So please stick around, and we'll see you in the next virtual room. Thanks again, Jim. Hope to see you in person soon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.